it's been challenging of late with all the stuff we got going on in the house.
Mm,
So, and I've in recent weeks have found it's um, uh, difficult to be at ease with all of the difficulty, suffering, and pain that Susanna has to live with.
mm.
So, um, uh, that's what you're hearing.
I get that.
Plus, it doesn't help that when you put stuff like caffeine or Provigil on top of it, that that can put more adrenaline in the system, and so you're more that that thing that gets provoked by whether it's someone expressing pain in some fashion or um, just more easily startled, and so that can uh, that can make your circumstances um, more. I'm not sure what the word is I'm looking for here, but
Yeah.
if it's already a situation that is um, maybe demanding, it can make it more so. Although
Hmm.
that's not really the right word, but you
I
get
know
the
what you
idea.
mean. Yeah.
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 Um,
But going back to the point where you said about kind of hard accepting all the pain and suffering that she's going through,
yeah.
just from a practical what we do kind of standpoint, what what does that actually mean for you? Like, how is it showing up in your experience?
It's 99.9% of the time, it's just an internal feeling, or well, internal feeling. It's just this feeling that uh, I guess what we would label a uncomfortable or unpleasant feeling.
Mm.
You know, when I articulate it, the idea is that it's it's hard to feel um, helpless or powerless to do much of anything about what she's going through. I mean, I can help her with everything she needs, because in addition to everything else, on her legs because it's hard for her to walk
Yeah.
distances. And, so if she needs something in the other room, I go get it for her. But um, aside from that, it's well, what I said was that it's hard to be powerless, helpless in the face of what she's going through. So, what I was trying to say was that I can do things for her. Um, I can help her out. I can try to comfort her. Help her find solutions when it's appropriate. But really, by and large, I mean, I that's all I can do. I can't take away her pain. I can't take away her difficulty. I can't improve her breathing. And so that's you want, I think most of us, when most human beings in this situation, we want to do what we can to alleviate their suffering and difficulty. And there's you can't ultimately you can't do anything about the causes. You know,
No, no, no. Sad fact of being alive, right? Where
right?
there is suffering and there is pain and sickness built in. Where I think it's helpful from what we do, though, is coming to terms with being able to accept that helplessness. There are two different levels there. There's the seeing her being in pain, and I don't want this to sound, heartless or anything because it's not meant that way, but we're in the moment that somebody that we're with is sick or having some sort of health problem, and we would
Mhm.
like for them to be healthy, we are arguing with reality in that moment. right? It's coming from a really nice place. Of course, we don't want them to suffer, but it is in that moment resistant to the fact that they are actually sick in this moment.
Mhm.
So we're already at odds with the way things are, which is putting us in line for our own suffering. But then also when you compound that with the like, um, you have a hard time feeling the helplessness, then that helplessness is another of those secondary overlays on
Mhm.
situation, right? That's tying in more to like past histories of feeling helpless and overlaying that. I know what that feels like. I'm feeling this now. That must be helplessness. I wish I could do something. I can't. There has to be some resistance to the moment, and then finding that I can't change what's in the moment. So that gives us that feeling of helplessness, which again, perfect world, if we had the ability to just be like, oh yeah, I feel helpless, that's fine. That wouldn't be a problem, but mostly we aren't very good with that. Most of us have issues with feeling helpless. So then that is compounding the resistance because now I also don't like the feeling of being helpless and I kind of wish I wasn't. So now I wish Susanna was healthy and I wish that I didn't feel helpless. So now we're doubly at odds with the moment.
Explain that part about doubling it again.
Yeah. So, well, because you're first having the resistance to her being sick and wanting
Mhm.
for her to be good. Now, we could probably also break that down because there's the altruistic, I really want everybody who I love and care about to be healthy and well and living a good and happy life. Also, when from the slightly less benevolent, altruistic side of things, when the people around us are not feeling well or are sick or there's some sort of impact on us, we tend to also feel uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So part of it is I would love for everybody around me to be in amazing health and living super happy lives, but also as much as I want that for them, I also kind of want it for me because when they're not, then I don't feel okay either. And so I'm also
Yes.
in resistance to my feeling not okay with them not being okay. So,
Right.
so there's a some of it is, probably coming from a really good altruistic place, and some of it is also a little bit of self-preservation. Like, I really wish that she would be okay so that I don't have to feel like this. And
Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead. Go ahead
well,
on that.
and some of that feeling like this could be from that extra layer of helplessness where I need her to be better or I want her to be better, and causes and conditions. She's not, right? There's something going on that she's not. And so because of that, I can't fix that. I can't wave a magic wand and just make her perfect again. I am now at odds with the reality of the fact that I can't do anything about it. There are limits to how much we can be there and support and do all of those things, but it doesn't actually change the underlying cause of whatever the ailment is. Um, so we're in resistance to them being sick. We're in
Mhm.
resistance to ourselves feeling unsettled because
Mhm.
they're sick, and we're resistance to our inability to be able to do anything about it and to actually just have to be in a world where the people that we love are sick and we cannot do anything about it except for offer whatever support we can in the moment. But those are all different levels that we are kind of more and more subtly um, uh, pitting ourselves against the reality of where we actually are because we would much prefer that it was not the case. We would really rather for it to be different.
I had noticed that second element. I had described it to myself a little bit differently, but the way I was noticing it was that um, I was wanting her to be better because when she's not, you can see some of it. Some of it you can see. I mean, you can see she has a hard time walking. I mean, that doesn't, even if she's completely silent, you can see that. But she's also expressing things out loud about what she's going through. And the it's not really thought through, but I'm aware of the fact that I'm wishing that things were better because when they're not, there's a reaction inside,
Hmm.
and I I don't want that uncomfortable,
Hmm.
unsettled feeling. And the way it looked to me was that there's an element in this that's self-serving,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah,
and
there usually is.
and that's to me that's kind of unfortunate because um, they with a loved one, anyone you care about, um, ideally it would be being there for them and doing everything you can for them and keeping your own uh, uh, seems to me petty self-serving um, motivations out of it.
Yeah, I think there is room for exploration on kind of all the fronts. So on one hand, we don't need to like vilify those necessarily as being petty and self-serving.
Okay.
Um, One thing is, you know, for you to really investigate how much of it is genuine, altruistic, benevolent. I really, you know, want her to be happy and healthy and feel well. Obviously, that's not always going to come about. So there are times in our life where we wish that for people who are not experiencing that in the moment. But it doesn't stop us from being able to wish that for them. It's the whole point of like metta meditation, right? You're wishing well for others, whether they are or not. It doesn't if you're not attached to the outcome of them actually being well, you are more than welcome to and more than able to wish them well all that you want, right? You can sit there 24 hours a day and you can wish for her to really be healthy and happy and all that. And there are, positive side effects to doing that. So that in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. Where the issue starts to arise is when we are doing that. I wish that she would get better because I don't like feeling the discomfort of this. So that's the kind of self-serving part. But again, I think being compassionate for yourself is also important here. So there might be a part of you that is genuinely, hurting when seeing somebody that you love in pain. So it's not an unhealthy thing to recognize that and to comfort yourself as well, because it is, caregiving roles are really taxing on the caregiver, both in terms of the energy spent in doing the actual things that the other person needs, but in the kind of emotional, psychological weight of seeing somebody that you love and care about not at their optimal, really having to witness the pain that they're in does take a toll on us. Um, so recognizing the part that is coming out of just genuine, love for the other person and be compassionate with yourself that that is there. Now, if there are layers where, and we can kind of do this with all of it, but any feeling of, I don't want this to be here. I don't want this reality to be this reality. I want to jump to a different timeline and, everybody is healthy and happy and all is well. That we can just, do the feeling into. And the goal there isn't um, to break or not even like transmute the discomfort in this moment. It's really about you find, you know, specifically where in the body it is that feels that unease or discomfort with her being sick.
Mhm.
And then settle with that while keeping that sort of elevated witness position. You're feeling the sensation, but you're witnessing it. You're not embroiled in the story or the emotion of it. You're recognizing that this is just something that the body is experiencing because it's in a situation that is, depending on how we frame it, either, reminding you of times in the past when you have been helpless or couldn't change things. It, I've been actually watching some videos and doing some research on some brain stuff, which has been really interesting. But there's even uh, kind of a theory about how uh, because our brain is always running these predictive processes, when we have a preference for something being a certain way, it's giving a prediction of how it thinks things should be. And when the situation comes back different from the prediction, we get this kind of feeling of discomfort in the body. It's like, oh, no, no, that's wrong. So if you have this kind of built-in prediction or assumption that she should be healthy and, active in the way she's been for years and all that, every time you get that sort of kickback of how things really are, there's this prediction error that makes us feel, it basically sends this little alarm in the body like something is wrong. Um, so some of it is very possibly neurobiological. There's just something going on in the chemistry of the brain that is causing that initial feeling of discomfort when things don't line up with the way that we would prefer them to be or would like them to be. So for that, again, we just come down to sit with the sensations, and it's almost like I'm always trying to find new ways of describing the sort of sensation that I'm pointing to, but it's like minimizing isn't quite the right word, but it's like those sensations take their appropriate size, as opposed to being rather overwhelming when, you're in. I assume when you're in the situation with her, there can be these feelings where it just really feels like it's sort of all over the body. And it's like, can even be like the whole room kind of feels like there's some not okay heaviness, friction, some discomfort. Like, do you have that kind of experience where it's like,
No,
oh,
actually, I don't.
okay,
Actually, I'm pretty well tuned into the fact that because I try to do a lot of stuff while I'm moving about and while things are happening and am in the flow of the day.
hmm
Because sometimes when things are happening and things come up, I can't walk away to go and just sit down and feel. Sometimes I
right,
can,
yeah,
and I try to remember to take those opportunities when I can. And it's funny that we're talking about this because I remember to sit with all kinds of other difficult feelings, but I've
uh-huh.
completely this one has been in a blind spot. But at any rate, now I'm oftentimes I when it comes up, I am generally aware of the fact that it's right in here because that's where everything seems to show up for the most part.
Yep,
And uh, as much as I can, I try to remember to just feel that feeling while it's happening when I'm, like I said, when I'm in the flow of the day.
yeah,
Uh, so yeah, I'm generally I'm aware of its actual size and location.
nice. When you have that, do you notice that there are other thoughts that have uh preceded it? That, like, are you thinking about the situation?
I haven't noticed that.
Okay.
That's a good pointer. Because I'm sure there is. One thing I have noticed part of the time is that oftentimes there, because I didn't think there were, I've been reflecting back on things that we've talked about and how you'll oftentimes really press for the fact that there has to be some kind of mental activity in a certain
hmm
situation. And and the thought has been, okay, well, if there's not any thought, there must be some kind of mental imagery. And so I've been looking for that and starting to see how oftentimes there is some kind of mental picture.
Nice.
And of course, it's very fleeting. I mean, we're talking milliseconds here.
It is. Yeah.
And it's usually not anything. It's not like say, oh, it was a scene of my house when I was a kid, or
Yeah.
it's not something you can describe. It's closer to abstract art or just color and shape. And it happened
Interesting.
just a couple of days ago, and I noticed the feeling that it provoked. I thought, what in the hell was that it provoked that feeling? Because I don't even know what that was. It was just
Yeah.
color and shape. What's so upsetting about that? It
Interesting.
must have some kind of meaning to something in
Yep.
the mind that I'm not aware
Yep.
of.
Yep. There's some association built in with it that is it. I think it's so fascinating because we don't really know exactly how the feedback of the conscious mind with the subconscious mind works. I mean, I know that there's
Hmm.
definitely a feedback loop. There is some connectivity there, but it's so interesting that we we really have so little connection to the underworking, or the the underlayer of mind, and
Yeah,
how these associations are built up and what is really happening in any given moment. This is like just the, absolute surface level of awareness that, it doesn't know very much. It really isn't
yeah.
privy to everything else.
It reminds me of this book I had when I was in high school, and I don't know where it went. Somehow it got lost in transit over the years, all the times we've moved, because I don't have it anymore, and I wouldn't have gotten rid of it. But anyway, there was this book by a guy named Marvin Minsky called Society of Mind,
Hmm,
and
interesting.
it talks about a lot of things regarding the brain and neurology, and how a sense of self is formed, and the kind of committee. But he also talks about that that communication between the conscious and the unconscious
Yeah,
or
yeah,
subconscious layer. Um,
yeah,
and I mean, this book was written in the 80s, so we knew less then than we do now.
yeah,
But he did a
yeah,
pretty good job of kind of giving you at least a general ballpark sense of um, some of that activity, how it might work. Uh,
yeah,
and it was really interesting. Uh, but I guess the feeling it left me with was the fact that um, they didn't understand it and probably never would.
yeah. Yeah, I think we're getting closer. I did read something recently, and I can't remember the exact parts that were involved, but there is definitely a very complex interplay between different whole networks in the brain that are constantly kind of feeding, the sense of conscious awareness there, and then that is impacting, the further calculations and predictions that are happening. So it's like it is serving a purpose. Like thinking is effectively serving a purpose in
Right.
that regard, but it's not necessarily the one that we think it is, or the way that we think it is.
Huh.
But it's definitely playing into the system. So but
Hmm.
it's I think quite complicated.
Well, that kind of gives a really vague but nonetheless useful sense of why some of the interesting things happen that can happen if you um, make it a point to uh, restrain all mental and verbal, outward verbal
Mhm.
talk for prolonged periods.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What we're it's actually like so. It was interesting. They did a study or studies on this, and they found that if people initially go by like a gut response,
Hmm.
so you're in a situation and you don't take the time to think about it and reason it out, you give a response. Um, that response is usually different from if you give them time to think about it and reason through it. They will choose something different. the outcome of the reasoned choice is usually ends up being much better than the initial one. Because the thinking that we're doing, even though we kind of vilify it a lot of times in the non-dual world, is actually serving a lot of purposes in our basic function. I mean, we have evolved to be able to think because it helps. It helps us to actually make better choices that for our survival and health and all of that.
Yeah.
The issue is that we tend to identify with it in a way
Right.
that is, well, it's me thinking, and it's, we create this whole self narrative around it. But the thought itself isn't actually a problem. And it is kind of interesting that, if you had somebody who has absolutely no ability to carry on kind of inner dialogues or inner imaginative um, formulations of what might happen in the future, and judging, like, well, should I do this thing or that thing, and reasoning out the choice. If the brain, for whatever reason, of that person didn't have those abilities, they're actually going to be very limited in their ability to function compared to somebody who could. It's really not
Hmm.
the mental processing that is a problem. It's the identification with it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I fortunately I got over that idea that thinking is somehow bad
That's
um,
good.
uh, some time ago. But yeah, and partly because of you and I talking together and Pernilla's videos and other things that have come my way in the last couple of years. I, that's where I'm at with it. It's
Yeah.
the issue is the identification with it, which means that if you're trying to suppress thinking, I mean, it's cool to do as an
Yeah.
exercise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some interesting things can result, but
Yeah.
if you really have thinking, labeled as something negative and to, like you said, vilified, then you're overlooking a really great opportunity to practice because when thoughts
Absolutely.
are coming up, you can be working with identification.
Completely. Yeah, absolutely. Um, oh, I forgot what I was gonna say. Yeah, it's there's absolutely, we for people who do silent retreats and things like that, it's still wonderful. It's still giving all sorts of great opportunities to experience different ways that the brain can function and having different kinds of experiences. There's that's all very well and good. It's just a matter of you wouldn't really want to live your entire life like that. The thinking does have a purpose, and
Right.
in terms of living, a sort of healthy, balanced human life, it's really necessary to still have that functionality. It's just that it's also not helpful when it's just constantly going, 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 and it's
Yeah, exactly. And it's
entirely undisciplined mind.
I was doing something last night and taking care of something, and I noticed that the mind was just talking about it. And
Yeah.
at one point, after having seen this over and over again, realized, you know, it's interesting that there's this automatic assumption that um, it requires thinking to do this because I know full well it doesn't. So let's play around with this and let's finish this task without any thinking and prove to that part of the mind that has that idea that this can be done
Yeah.
completely and as it needs to be done without any thought. And so I finished the rest of
Yeah.
it without any of the internal talk. I just like,
That's
put a
amazing.
pause on it for a while. And of
Yep.
course, as the other part of the brain knew, all of it was taken care of. It was
Yeah.
done as it needed to be done. Finish the task without any additional mental input.
Yeah. Which is super helpful to be able to do. Having that ability to turn the inner chatter on and off, and to not be completely at the mercy of that inner voice, because it oftentimes, it's one thing to have like an inner voice that's just kind of giving off, history statistics and facts, like if it was just completely irrelevant, detached stuff, yeah, it's noisy, but it's fine. It's just like having a TV on in the room. It's not a big deal. The problem is that it mostly tends to be when it's problematically circling and going on and on. It's usually coming with that a lot of um, self uh, self-talk. There's a lot of negatively biased self-talk. There's a lot of rumination about things that have happened. There's negative anticipation about future events that you're trying to live ahead of time. I mean, that's where the whole sort of default mode network sense of self is kicked on and is creating that constant state of um, inner distraction and
What is
self-negation.
it that kicks that on?
The default mode network.
No, what is it that
Oh,
turns on the default mode network? You were
oh,
saying
well,
that. I missed it because somebody was making noise.
oh, sorry. Well, basically, I mean, the default mode network basically kicks on anytime that we're not like actively engaged in a task. And so
Huh.
it's a task negative network. So when you're not like intentionally focused on doing something, the default mode network will just naturally come on, and that's what's creating all of those narrative self-talk, all the narrative self-talk, the like me through time narration stories, making sure that
Oh,
everything is like in somehow related to me and that sense of me. That's all coming from the default mode network. So anytime that you're not doing something that is like intensely focused, that selfing mechanism is basically on and creating a sense of, purpose and story and me in the world. So when you do focus, like when you take that time and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to think and I'm just going to like pay full attention to what I'm doing, that is turning down the default mode network. It's exactly what we do in watching breath meditation.
right.
Watching the breath is the task that you're intentionally doing. And then when you start to kind of lose focus on it a little bit, default mode network whirls up. And then, oh, now all of a sudden I'm talking about going grocery shopping tomorrow and that thing that happened and all that. That's the daydreaming. The daydreaming mind is the default mode network at work. It daydreams and chatters on when we're not actively doing something. Um, and so you're basically taking it's been a really fascinating thing diving into the specifics of all of this. So basically what happens is you're watching your breath and the default mode network starts, going on. And then your anterior cingulate cortex is basically like your little attention alarm that goes off that's like, oh, you were supposed to be doing this other task, and now you are, you've diverted. And then that and the prefrontal cortex kick in. You basically have this like diversion of attention back to the breath, and then you're there for a while until you start to lose attention, and then it's this constant balance. But all we're doing with all of these kind of meditation techniques and all this stuff is basically just strengthening that that feedback loop of being able to notice immediately when attention has drifted from doing a certain task and then snap it back onto the task. And when we're focused on the task intently, the default mode network just turns down and the sense of self starts to fade again.
Huh.
It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Huh. Yeah. Obviously, knowing that stuff, even knowing it in great detail with great depth at a technical level, isn't enough to help somebody see through the reality of the illusion of self. Um, because otherwise, you'd have all kinds of neurologists and
Yeah,
other scientists who, um,
totally.
would have had a moment of coming to.
No,
Um, but if you take that in tandem with understanding other information and practices,
yep,
doing certain practices, see how that can reinforce it.
exactly. Yeah.
Probably fairly strongly, I would think.
Yeah, well, I think it's really helpful for a couple reasons. One, it puts us in the position where if we know what regions of the brain are causing our sense of self or causing our sense of spatiality, the feeling of distance or the feeling of time or things like that, If we know what regions are causing this and we want to target them specifically, then we know which practices to do to target
Mhm.
those specific regions. So we can have much more effective practice that goes, excuse me, it goes right to the root of the issue, as opposed to kind of vaguely hoping that something is going to do something, you know?
Right.
So that helps. The other thing is, I find it useful because it undermines a lot of times when people come to this stuff, there's like that kind of spiritual idea that we have that, like, yes, but you need to purify your soul in order to, ascend to higher levels, and you need to blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of that that's kind of it creates so much extra selfing because now the people are concerned about, oh, but I haven't, freed my karma enough to be able to sit in meditation for a while. And there are so many like beliefs and other um there's other so much other baggage that's been brought to it that if we can come down to where it's like, oh no, actually when you're sitting, what you're doing is this. You to give it kind of a metaphor, people don't go to the gym and say, I'm not good at lifting weights because I have too much karma that I'm carrying. And, like I just, my soul isn't pure enough yet to be able to lift 50 pounds, right? No, like you just haven't lifted enough weight going forward. You just need to strengthen those muscles and you need to activate new ones that haven't worked yet. And if you take it from that kind of perspective, all of this sort of training that people, meditation training that people have been doing for thousands of years, it's like a type of, mental weightlifting that you're basically just, you're working out parts of the brain that are new or haven't been engaged enough before or whatever else, and you're building new pathways, you're strengthening um, certain networks and certain pathways, you're making new connections, you're trimming and getting rid of old ones that are no longer necessary, like habits and anxiety reactions and things like that. The more we do these kind of practices, like all of this stuff with like sitting and feeling sensation, and then
Mhm.
having that kind of meta awareness while it's happening is helping to restructure the brain so that when you are in a situation that would ordinarily provoke that kind of reaction in you, those connections are just trimmed. Like you have new pathways that are reacting differently in those situations. It's not that your soul has somehow, gone up a level and earned a degree. So I think if we putting it in that perspective, at least in terms of it being a very useful metaphor to counteract the maybe not so useful spiritual egoic kinds of uh, traps that people fall into. It's one of those things where we can use it to help counterbalance. It's like an antidote. So if you come in with a lot of the like philosophical, spiritual ideas about what's happening, and then my fundamental flawedness of not being good enough to do this and being, you know, I don't know, I have to purify all my past sins or whatever the things are. You can counteract that by, oh, but actually, if you just think about it, like there are certain regions of your brain which have been overused or overly strengthened, and they're causing you to be in, some sort of like fear cycle that's going on. And we very strategically use these tools that are shown to change that response. It puts us in a position where you can lose some of that selfing that's been causing so much suffering. Um, and of course, it's still some of it is the brain science stuff is still more theoretical than others. There's
Right.
really good evidence for a lot of it, but there's some that is still yet unproven. So, but I think it's really useful to have something to use as a framework that isn't just, yeah, but for thousands of years, people have said that you should, go sit and say moo over and over again until maybe something happens. Like it's really helpful to know why you're doing that, or at least give you
Yeah.
a potential reason for how how to readjust your practice to give the outcome that you're looking for.
Right. Well, hang on a second.
Yeah,
If you don't mind, I want to kind of go back to um,
absolutely.
where we were at before because there are a couple of things there that uh, I guess just kind of want to put out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
First one is I don't. hmm, I made the mistake last night of saying something to Susanna because I had noticed that for a week, maybe 2 weeks, she's starting to. I mean, she's very vocal. You know, some people when they're not well in whatever
Yeah,
form that takes, they tend to be quiet about it. I'm one of those.
yeah,
Um, Other people are very vocal. They're, anything that comes up, there's a noise, a sound, or they
yeah,
exclaim something, what have you. And
yeah.
so she tends to be that way. And so I noticed that more and more she was kind of narrating every little something that come along. I mean, even stuff that didn't have anything much to do with what's actually going on with her. And in the moment I said it, the idea was that there was this concern that she's making things even more uncomfortable for herself. And so I said something out loud about the fact that I've noticed that she is seems to be saying something about every little something that comes
Mhm.
along. And it I'm not sure what the exact word is for the effect it had on her, but I guess it hurt her feelings.
Hmm.
And there was some difficulty. There was something there between us because of the fact that I'd said something and it hurt her feelings. And yeah, and I went back and addressed that because I felt bad about it.
Hmm.
Once I had addressed it and made some amends, tried to right the situation as best I could. The question that came up was, well, what was your intention really? Because I know what I
Hmm.
thought it was at the time, but
Yeah.
then at that point, reflecting on it, started to get a sense that that intention really wasn't much, if anything, to do with her so much as it was um, me trying to do something about the fact um, hearing these things um, uh, kind of weighs on me.
Hmm.
And it would be really helpful. I mean, it might just be the case of the only thing you can do is um, if you're not sure about the intention and the value of something you're about to express, then just go ahead and don't say it. But at the same time, it would really be great if there's a way to get clear on intention for why we do or say things.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's necessarily realistic or possible. It may just be a case of you have to refrain from saying or doing something and then take the time to look into it. But it wasn't a great surprise. I've seen it before, but it was an actual lived example of um, the questionability of intention. You
Yeah.
know?
That's so good. I'm so glad that you noticed, just afterwards that it was like, actually, maybe that wasn't, the exactly why I said that. Maybe it wasn't just to be helpful. Because you're right. A lot of times we have these sort of almost like, you know, dual pathways going on, where on one hand we have kind of the story that it's like I'm being the kind of wiser, helpful one. Maybe she didn't know that she's making all of these noises, and I'm just going to point out to her, and she might find it really. But probably underneath that, there's that second track that's going on. That's like, God, she's making that noise, and it's like your dog licking, right? Like it's like that same sort of misophonia kind of thing that it can bring up. So we have to be aware. So you're right that we don't always and probably won't ever know the different more subtle layers of why what our intention is. But you can notice just before you say it, what is the feeling tone in the body?
Mm.
If there's a feeling of irritation in the body, it's probably not coming from a good place. Right? There's probably some selfishness in there. If you have that sense of like something similar or maybe even a bit more mild, but similar to like the dog, misophonia issue, if you feel anything going on in the body that feels uncomfortable, that is propelling you to give that very helpful advice.
So
Um,
how did you say that? You said, what is the feeling tone of the body?
yeah.
And then you described some sort of, I can't remember the words you used for it, unpleasant feeling. And if there's an unpleasant feeling, then it's probably, I mean, I know you've got this recorded, but,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
it's recorded, but,
yeah. Yeah.
um,
Well, exactly. So notice usually, helpful advice comes from a neutral place in the body, right?
okay.
Or maybe positive. If you check in
Right.
and you just like, oh, you see somebody, an old lady struggling to put her grocery bag in the car, you go over and you help, not because like, oh God, I hate seeing people do that, and like what, right? Like you just feel either neutral or, some sort of sense of compassion or something, and then you go and you
Yeah.
just do the thing. It's not to make yourself feel better. If, however, you feel before you're going to say anything to somebody, if you feel that there is some sort of tension, uncomfortable, discomfort, unease, um, tightness, constriction, that whatever you feel when you get like that misophonia
Hmm.
sensation, any of those things are there, and you get the urge to give some helpful advice to somebody, that's a really
Hmm.
good indication that you should check it. Hold on a second,
Okay.
because that's probably more self-serving than it is helpful.
Okay, that's exactly the kind of thing I was looking for was
Yeah,
some kind of way of dealing with it, rather than, I mean, and there's nothing wrong with it, but rather than just,
yeah,
going with the idea of the Zen idea of the, what was it, the three gates or the four gates? I forget now. Anyway, rather than just applying something like that, it's much more useful to be able to have something um, more concrete. uh, it's not really the word I'm looking for, but something that's not just kind of an idea or an abstraction that
yeah.
can be used
The,
to.
the, There is something to be said. I mean, we can use I think you're talking about like the right speech. Like, is it kind? Is it timely? Is it helpful? Is it,
Yeah, that's the
uh,
one.
yeah, was
I
it,
always heard it as, is it kind? Is it true? Is it necessary?
is it true?
Which are the
Yeah.
three H's.
Yep. Yep. Kind, true, necessary, or helpful and timely. So is this the time? It might be something that the person needs to hear, but is this the right time for it? Are they
Yeah,
actually in the right receptive state for it right now? Or the situation being correct now, or should it be later on at some other point? So also very helpful. It's kind of reading the room, reading the situation. So that's also, I think, really, really useful advice. But in terms of like knowing our internal reason for giving that particular advice, it's really helpful to check in to see what state the body is in just before that advice is about to pop out of the mouth, and
yeah.
then
Okay.
tune in, and then it's like, okay, so you have this situation where she's making a lot of noise. I'm assuming, are feeling some sort of discomfort in the body. You have the
Right.
idea that I'm going to, point this out because maybe she hasn't noticed that she's doing it, and I think it might actually be making things worse. You're about to say it, and then if you can pause and then check out those sensations that you just kind of overlooked by going to her being the problem,
Right.
and then come back to, okay, okay. So can I sit with this discomfort, with her making noise? Why is it that her making noise is making me uncomfortable? Is it the things that she's saying? Is it the tone of voice that I'm hearing? Is there something about uh the is it the sort of meaning of it that she would only be making those noises if she was in pain, which indicates that she is in pain, which means, you know, I'm feeling badly for some other reason. Like it doesn't have to be a prolonged investigation, but sort of going through the little checklist of like, what am I feeling? Can I feel it? What exactly is it about this whole situation, which even seems to be related to this sensation? Can it just be a sensation in a bubble where she gets to make all the noises that she wants over there, and that
Mhm.
does not cross that distance to go from the sound that she's making to an internal state here? Does that have to actually connect in some way? Can you just feel the sensation? Can you also hear the sound? You know, you can make it into a like a sixth fetter sound exercise to be like, can you listen to
Hmm.
the sound? And is it just sound? You know, do you have to put those layers of meaning onto the sound? Does it have to be associated with either, you know, thoughts about how she is or long-term ramifications of her being in this state or feeling like this or anything else? You can take any one of these moments and you can pull it apart to go through every individual thread, you know, that you want to. What was your little
Something you said, I don't know what it was, but something you said it just kind of made something really clear. Um, Now, before I say this, there's another thing at work with all of this. Yeah, this all definitely probably somehow connects to, I went through a period of time when I was a kid, like late elementary school, middle school, um, when my mom was really sick. And there are times that, she had a hard time getting around. She wouldn't leave
mm,
bed for days at a time.
yeah.
And my mom and Susanna are both short,
Mm,
both heavy set,
yep.
both have dark brown hair. There are a lot of these funny parallels.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm sure that that's in there. I'm sure that's in the mix. But something you said um, made clear that um, I've been getting a lot of criticism from various quarters lately from people because I don't have a quote job. You
Mm,
know, never mind
yep,
the fact that my life the way it is currently and has been for a while. Like I don't know if I told you recently, I tried to take some downtime, get a bunch of things done that need to be done, and
yep,
then just take about 7 days of not doing anything except the
yeah,
absolute essential day-to-day stuff.
yeah,
Didn't happen. Things just keep coming up.
yeah.
Doesn't matter how I try, they just keep coming up.
I get
And
that.
so, no one's going to account for that. It's probably going to get noisy here because there's someone coming to the front door.
Okay.
Um, because Godfrey's in here and he'll set everyone else off. Maybe we won't. We'll see. But anyway, that I have been feeling guilt because Susanna is having to work. She
Mm,
has her job and she's having to work while going through all of this. And uh, I see how I need to let everyone out. Anyway, I'm sure a lot of these internal reactions or these internal feelings are um, because it hasn't been a problem most of the time. It's only recently it started to become an issue. And I think there's some guilt, and that guilt, um, um, as you've said before, there has to be a buy-in into what
yeah,
other people think.
yeah,
And I think for some reason that guilt sets off some kind of belief in the whole cultural paradigm because I'm keenly aware of the fact that I probably wouldn't be hearing this stuff from other people. And I hate to say this because I know how this might sound to some people, but I don't mean it the way that it might sound. But if our genders were reversed, if Susanna
yeah,
was the husband and I was the wife,
yeah,
no one would think anything
yeah,
about it at all.
yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
male, and so there are all these ideas, beliefs, expectations, what have you.
Yep.
And, it's hard not to get caught up in those cultural uh, belief systems, I guess, if that's really
Oh,
what we should call them.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so, having that guilt, even though, as Susanna said, we talked about this, and she said, look, you have a job. Would more money be nice? Sure, but fortunately, she makes an absurd amount of money.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
but still, um, the fact that I you know have the load on me that I do and have for a very long time and probably will for some
yeah.
time. For
Yeah.
some reason, that's not enough to undermine that cultural belief and
Yeah.
and buy into it. And as a result of buying into it, find myself affected by what other people are saying.
Yep.
There's this guilt, and then you know the her expressing pain, discomfort, difficulty in various ways becomes more um, has more oomph to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Well, let me start by asking, what then is the alternative? She works, I understand the situation, but she's got a good job, and you're taking care of everything else around the house. What is the alternative? If you feel guilty for something, it indicates that you could do otherwise.
I hadn't thought of that.
So what is your alternative?
Um, my alternative recently has been just to make sure, well, one, to try to do more.
Mhm.
Um, because here recently, in the last few months, I'd finally managed to convince myself to slow down some.
Mhm.
And, um, which for a long time I couldn't get to that place. I could not get to slowing down. It was too uncomfortable. It felt too, just didn't feel right.
Yeah.
So one is to do more instead of trying to take downtime. The other thing is, um, oh gosh, now I've lost it. But I guess it's kind of a shade of that first idea of doing more, of really making sure that I'm on top of things and not letting things slide. And so here lately, I have been, um, you know, taking on even more because God knows I mean, there's always more and there's always plenty to do, you
There
know.
is.
Um, uh, that's kind of been my alternative lately.
So does that actually change anything though? Doing
Mhm.
more, yeah, sure, maybe you'll get a few more things done, but it also leads to uh, uh, um, lower bandwidth and less reserve energy and
Mhm.
usually less patience, less ability to regulate
Uh,
emotions, things like that. There are usually some downsides to taking on more. Unless,
right.
of course, you're already doing so little that it's just, barely coming up to the surface. But I don't think that was the case.
No, that is definitely not the case.
So are you taking on more? And I know this is kind of a weird question because there's, like you said, there's always something more to be done. But are you taking on more because there really is more that absolutely needs to be done? Or is it a way of just trying to alleviate some of that guilt to make it feel like you are now stepping up and really earning your place and doing enough?
It's some of both. I mean, some of it is to assuage guilt, but at the same time, you know, like I said, there's always more stuff coming up. You know,
Hmm.
in the last 2 weeks, in as a result of this doing more, I finally got around to some things that I'd been putting off that really needed to be done. I mean, they could only be put off for so long. Some of them would affect the house,
Yeah.
and um, um, so like to answer your question, yeah, it's some of both. Some of it is assuage guilt. Some of it is there's stuff that I had been letting slide, and like, okay, well, let me just go ahead and take care of all this stuff, and
Yep.
wrote down a list and then just started going through the list.
So that part is fine. These things really need to be taken care of. The house is going to fall down if I don't. That's fine. Do notice the ones that you're doing just to assuage guilt, though. The thing that feels like you have to be in constant motion or else you are in somehow, deficient. If you notice something like that coming up,
It's hard to separate those most of the time, maybe even all of the time, because, for instance, there was some laundry in the bedroom that I had been putting off for about a week. Um, some of it's putting off, some of it is this weird forgetfulness that seems to have set in the last year and a
yeah.
half or so. Um, and so something happened and it provoked a feeling, and there was this feeling of, of discomfort, not feeling right. And I don't know for sure, I can't recall, but I'm going to guess that that guilt was in there. And so I went in and I just went into the bedroom and went ahead and did all the laundry, you know. So they were both in
Yeah,
there, is what I'm trying to say.
yeah, I get that. Eh, Being aware of the thoughts that lead up to it is really helpful. So when you get the flash of
Mhm.
like, oh, laundry, what is the next thing that follows? Is it a thought of, oh God, really don't want to do that, but then, oh yeah, but if I don't do it, nobody's going to do it, and it's been sitting there for so long, and is there a thought process? Is there a bunch of mental images? Are there sensations in the body that are giving you a feeling of really don't want to do this, or a feeling of that guilty, if I don't do this, then I'm going to feel even worse about myself than if I had just done it. Taking in all of that into account before you do it makes you more and more aware of exactly why you are engaging now in that moment with doing the
Okay.
laundry, as opposed to tomorrow or a week ago.
Okay. All
Um,
right.
so being aware of it, and if there are things that really can be, you know, oh, sorry, if there are things that really can be like put off, and um, if you're really feeling burned out or run down, doing the compassionate thing, and if it's not something that's really going to, impact the well-being of the house and the people in it, and animals in it, then it's okay to put that off a bit, but just notice why you were doing it to begin with, because that's really our most important thing, is the like, what is driving my behavior? Is it coming from a feeling of guilt? Is it coming from obligation? Is it coming because I genuinely want to do the thing? Is it coming because is it begrudging? Am I creating a story about it? Is it just happening? Having all of these, an awareness of all of these, gives us a much better, well, for one thing, it gives us a clearer view of why we're behaving the way that we are, but also just having that kind of meta awareness that's there, that is always aware of our mental state and our physical state in the body, keeps us from getting sucked into it in the way that causes all of the identification and suffering. So
Being
just,
aware of the feeling in the body is what does that, you said?
yeah, and the
Okay.
thoughts, right? Like being aware of, like, even when you're feeling guilt, being aware that you're feeling guilty, or that there's a feeling of guilt in the body, what we're calling guilt anyway, in the body, being aware of the thoughts that are running off that are creating a story of guilt, or creating a story about why I should be doing something else, or why I have to do that for whatever reason. Just being aware of all of that, having that level of that metacognitive awareness where you're like, aware that all of this is happening, is itself undercutting the identification with those stories.
Something you said in there
Yeah.
raised the point that it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to take a look at what guilt actually is to investigate that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like every emotion, especially those really sticky ones,
Hmm.
super important to actually investigate what is the experience of guilt. We operate out of it so much as though it's a real thing. Coming down into the body, feeling those individual sensations that make up what we call guilt, and being aware of all the stories that play out about it. all of the things about the me who is the one who should be feeling guilty and all of that is super relevant to dive into.
Hmm. Okay, well, I made a note of that too.
Yeah.
Um, but as all of this stuff has been going on here for the last few weeks, um, since the last time we spoke, really, um, the one thing that keeps coming up is that on one hand, it feels like working with the fourth and fifth fetter has kind of largely got forgotten.
Mm,
As an aside, I'll add that when I remember that, I always make it a point to do the little
nice.
congratulations game,
That's nice.
to try to encourage that to be remembered more.
Yeah.
Um, so it gets forgotten or is overlooked, and um, that has brought to mind that this is something that it's been almost a year now since we started working actively on Fetters 4 and 5,
Mm,
and um, it's there's just this sense of it's time to um, really focus in on this and try to get into it and see it clearly.
mm.
Um, once and for all. I mean, I know the fetters, none of them are ever done perfectly, and
Yeah.
it's a lifetime process. But just like what happened with the first fetter, um,
Yep.
there's a line that, or a line, for lack of a better metaphor, a line that can be crossed
Yeah.
where there's a before and after in the sense that you've undone an illusion or seen through something
Hmm.
that before hadn't.
Yeah.
And there's this irony, desire to see that, to get to that, to really see Fetters 4 and 5 clearly, and hopefully undermine or release or dissolve um, some of these um, aversion and attraction activities that go on, because that's what all of this stuff that we've been talking about and that has been going on for the last few
Yeah.
weeks or longer.
Yep.
That's what it really seems to point to me is Fetters 4 and
Yeah.
5.
Okay.
There's a lot of desire for certain things and a lot of aversion for things, and
Yep.
if those were released to some degree or dissolved to some degree, it would probably be a very different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I was talking about at the beginning with the resistance to the moment being the way that it is.
Hmm.
Resistance is not wanting
Hmm.
or wanting something that's not here. So it is. It's completely in that realm. Though I do want to pause a minute and come back to that because I forgot. I wanted to circle back again to the
Okay.
alternative thing just before we go back to the 4 and 5.
All
So
right.
also when I said about, what is the alternative in this
Oh
situation,
yeah.
right? Where I also want to go with that is so Susanna works a job that is thankfully, a good, well-paying job,
Right.
so things are stable. You're taking care of everything else. Is there another reasonable alternative that's on the table? Like, is there an alternative for you to get a well-paying job and for her to not be working? Is that like a plausible thing?
No, it truly isn't. Not with my job history.
Yeah,
And when I say job history, that includes a lot of things, not just the history of working and the kind of work
yeah.
I've done. Um, with the kind of money Susanna makes, no. And we even talked about that, and she said it before I did. If it was all on me, at the very least we'd be downsizing out of this house, which isn't a really big house,
Hmm.
but we'd have to go to something probably much smaller.
Yeah,
And who knows what else, a lot of other things would have to be given up.
yeah. So let that sink in. When there's guilt around the situation being the way that it is, recognize that there is not actually a suitable alternative.
Yeah,
Yeah, again, we feel guilty because it's like, oh, I could have done something other than I did. I did the wrong thing. I feel guilty that I'm not doing the right thing right now, and I know what that right thing is. You don't have another option.
right.
The feeling of guilt around that is misplaced.
I mean, never mind the money too. If I was not here in the house, or even if I found a job working from home, you're
Yeah,
going to be expected to be doing whatever it is with at best, a few small breaks for however many hours a day.
yeah,
And there are, I mean, it's pretty much near constant right now that if I'm not available to her, then there are a lot of things that don't happen, and there could even be some bad things that happen,
yeah,
uh, and wish it was otherwise, but Tuesday is only able to handle so much. She
yeah,
can,
of course.
she can, she does a very small amount, and sometimes she doesn't even want to do that.
Yeah,
So, um, but something, I agree with you. I hear what you're saying. Let it sink in. Really
yeah,
let that, percolate down into the mind. Um, there was a deepened understanding of, that whole program that runs of
yeah,
being the one who's the problem, being the bad guy.
yep,
There's another part of that it has been completely overlooked, and it's useful to understand this. I'm glad it came up because there's always been this weird thing that goes on between me and other people when I deal with them, and it's that out of that, I don't know how it happened, but somehow the understanding that developed as a kid, what hearing those things was, you're the problem, everything will be fine if you weren't here, and somehow the understanding came along with it that you're bad, but everyone else is fine. Everyone
sure.
else
Yeah,
they're all good people.
of
You're
course.
the one who's the bad person. And
Yeah,
so that colors every interaction I have with every human being. There's
yeah,
always this automatic, mostly unconscious assumption that I am less than the other person. And so
yeah,
when people say things like the kinds of things I've been hearing recently, there's also that buy-in at the level of, well, they're good. Those people are
yeah,
fine. They're not a problem to anyone in any way. They're good
mhm,
people. You're the one who's the problem.
yeah,
And that I don't quite understand how that works, but I can
yeah,
sense that that plays a part in the buy-in.
yeah. I could see that. Yeah, I mean, there are so many things at play here. One, we have that kind of, you're right, there's a cultural expectation, both gender-based and also in terms of, it's funny because Pernilla and I were talking about this recently. We have an obsession in the US with the identification with your job that
Oh
you
yeah.
don't have in a lot of other cultures. So we actually saw, it was really funny. There was a thing that they did. This is kind of on a tangent, but there was basically a thing that they did in Sweden where to celebrate however many years it was, 250 years, I think, of free speech, they gave out a phone number and you could call the number and it would just call a random Swede. So you could just talk to like a random Swedish person and they would pick up the phone. And they did a thing on live on English TV and they called a random Swede. And the funny thing was, because England is very similar to the US in terms of like identification with job, they
Mhm.
asked, one of the first things they asked this random dude was, "What do you do?" And he said, "Oh, I'm out shopping." because because it doesn't translate to like the first thing you ask a person is what their job is. It doesn't reference. So he answers what he's currently doing in this moment.
That's
And
great.
right. So it's fascinating from that cultural perspective that here it's like so normal that one of the first three questions anybody asks you is what do you do for a living? Because that defines you. And it defines how I should feel about you, whether you're higher or lower than me, and you know,
Yeah,
all the different cultural bullshit that's part of it is tied in with that question. So I think, yeah, if you were living in another country, that you probably wouldn't have had quite the level of attachment or stickiness that you have with this particular issue. But then going
right.
back, you're right that when you have that kind of built-in assumption that you are always bad, there's always a problem with you, no matter what, that is impacting absolutely every interaction and decision and thought process that you have. Um, Undoing that is, I mean, obviously we talk a lot about this with all the second Fetter stuff, and we've talked about this in the past. Being aware of the program as it happens is one of the more important things. So the fact that you're becoming more and more aware of it, like
Hmm.
when you talk to somebody and you have that, they ask about your job and you say you're, staying at home and taking care of the family and the house and all that stuff. Being aware of exactly in what way that I am not good line comes on is going to be really helpful. For one, noticing that it's there in some fashion is already useful because you can start to undermine it. You can start to question, is that true? But the more clear you can be on, like, when somebody asks you that and you have this initial assumption that they are good, I am bad, how are you being represented in this? How is that whole thing? What is there a mental image of a Darrell that is showing up which is representative of the bad totality of Darrell? Are there specific images? Are there memories? Is there a self-talk? What exactly is going on in the moment that gives you the impression that you have an underlying belief in you being bad?
Hmm. Well, that's something that I'll need to look into because I'm
Yeah.
sure there's more there than I'm currently aware of. But so far, what I can say that I am aware of is one is a feeling in the body,
Hmm.
uh, just kind of this unpleasant feeling. But the other thing is that I see um, oftentimes, as long as they're not noticeably shorter than me, there's this sense of looking up at them
Mm.
and the fact that, they're taller, they're above me.
Yeah.
And there's also um, that anyone who is of adult age, and I don't mean just having crossed the line of 18 or whatever it might
Yeah.
be in certain areas, but where, they're physically developed, they're of a certain age, probably like 30 and beyond,
Yeah.
that there's almost always, maybe even always, um, I notice it sometimes, other times I don't, that they are the adult. I'm a kid. I always feel like a kid compared to everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I actually can relate to that in a lot of ways. Um,
Really?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've always always kind of joked about having Arrested Development, not just the show, but the actual,
Right. Yeah, the
yeah,
actual idea.
the actual
Yeah.
idea. Yeah. It's so yeah. I understand that same kind of thing, and I think part of that, and that's why I mentioned the image, is that if you notice, a lot of times we have sort of it's almost like a caricature of Darrell or Todd that's in the mind. When you
Hmm.
think about Darrell, there's probably this kind of rough caricature that shows up. It might be partially visual, it might be, part felt, something else.
Hmm.
Um, and you're really not relating to, let's put it like this. If you are in a situation where you're talking to somebody who's 30 or above, and you feel like you're relating to them as an adult, you have an impression, a caricature of them right now that is making them into an adult. Because otherwise, they're just, a human shape in front of you.
Right.
There's something in the interpretation of what you're seeing which gives that the form of adultness. There's
Huh.
something in you at the same time that takes that diminutive size that says
Mhm.
there's a caricature there of something that says, I am the kid in relationship. So important to become aware of, is there like a mental image? Is it self-talk? Is it felt in the body? What exactly is happening when you get that idea that you are shrunk in size compared to this other person? what is it that feels less like, you know, I get we have a thing a lot of times where if we're talking to somebody who is, an expert in the field or something, we feel somehow less knowledgeable or less, I don't know,
Qualified.
qualified, yeah, compared to the other person. That again is something that's even it's not real in any way, but there's some impression that we have that we're using to make us feel that in comparison to this other person. We're very much isolating, I don't know, talking to a astrophysicist, you feel like they're like, brilliant and but they might be wearing like, their underwear on backwards or something because there's some other deficiency in their processing that you're not aware of. But they're really genius when it comes to that. But their life might be in complete disarray. They've got three families going at one time, and so, like you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
could be a complete mess. But you're doing a caricature of what you think they are. You're representing them as a certain, they have their shit together, they are, super intelligent, that is what an adult looks like, and all of that. And I don't, and then you're doing a comparison to say, I don't feel like I have that level of knowledge about astrophysics, or I don't feel like I dress the way they dress, or I don't feel like, I have as much money coming into my bank account as they do, or whatever metric you're using, you're just isolating one or two specific factors and then comparing yourself in a way that makes you feel lesser. And then you're putting them on a pedestal. But there are infinite number of things about their life that you have no idea about that are,
Right.
you're probably way more together than they are on lots of accounts. Um, it's just a matter of comparison, and it's a matter of that internal characterization that we do, that caricaturization that we do, where we're not really seeing the other person. We're seeing a representation of them encapsulating something that we feel like they have that we don't have. And then we're doing the comparison, so we always come out on the short end.
It just hit me that I didn't really quite clearly understand how you meant caricature. I was taking it literally. I mean, as much as you can apply that idea, but you don't
Hmm.
necessarily mean it in a literal sense. You're just talking about assuming things about their person and creating a misrepresentation of that person based on these assumed ideas.
Effectively. And your misrepresentation might come in terms of like you, okay, if there's a person standing in front of you, there is light reflecting off of them coming into the retina and then, this person being
Oh,
created, right?
okay.
You are literally creating a version of them. Now, the one that
Right.
you see in front of you is, we're going to say, the most close to the real one that there is, right? They're like, if you look at the mug of water in front of you, or the glass of water in front of you,
Hmm.
we know you're not actually seeing the real glass of water, but you're seeing the closest thing that we have to our representation of that glass of water. However, you also have an assumption or a perception of the glass of water and a whole bunch of stories about it, right? Where that glass came from, whether I'm thirsty or not, how much I want to pick up that glass of water and drink it, whether I should actually have a nicer glass than this one. Does this one okay? Is it dirty? Did I wash it? Like all of these layers are being kind of caricatured onto that or represented onto that in a way which it might have visual qualities, it might have more auditory qualities, it might have more abstract kind of felt qualities. And we do so much more than that to the people that we're interacting with.
Right.
So what I'm saying is like you see a person in front of you, your perception of them is already your own individual virtual simulation of what they look like because again, the brain is putting together a select amount of sensory information that's creating a virtual reality experience of this other person. But worse than that, you are then creating thoughts and impressions and this kind of caricaturization about that image itself. So that's like one level of abstraction removed from even the simulation that we're engaged with in daily life.
Right.
And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Um, hmm. Hmm.
And you do the same characterization with you or the caricaturization with you, and that's also
Right.
super important to notice because that's part of what's creating that sense of the self who is always being in comparison with others. So I think we were going back to 4 and 5, right? All right.
Yeah.
Do we? I can't remember exactly where we left off before then. It was about the caricatures and stuff. Do we sufficiently cover all your questions about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I believe so.
Okay.
Uh, yeah. I can't. It feels complete to me.
Okay, amazing. All right, so going back to 4 5.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously we've done a lot of work on 4 and 5 in the past. What
Yes.
do you feel like what has your practice been like with it, with all these things that we've talked about that eh, it's not quite the right question to ask why it hasn't clicked, but like what what has your experience been when you're doing these exercises of like with craving and the ones with, sitting with the feeling of not wanting?
Well, that's part of it, and that's part of why I feel like I need to really just kind of pardon these typical American or Western sort of um, um, expressions and all the implications and connotations. But it just feels like there needs to be a strong intention there and kind of knuckle down
Mm.
and really zero in on it and really work on it um, steadily. Like I said, that I think the best thing I can say is what I started with, a strong intention, because lately I've been forgetting. When I
Yeah,
do remember, it's almost always after the fact. Like I'll go and do something, like maybe go to the kitchen and get something, a snack. I don't need it. I'm not hungry. There wasn't even any kind of sensation in the stomach. All it was the mental talk, and it didn't even get questioned. It didn't get
yeah.
questioned. It didn't get seen. It was just, oh, chips. Next thing you know, I'm out in the kitchen opening up a bag of chips, and um,
Is that what your um mental talk is like? Like, is it literally that you just hear?
no, no. In fact, that's another thing that I don't want to derail this, but for another time, I wouldn't mind discussing this to be really clear on it. More often than not, mental talk doesn't really show up as words. It shows up as, I don't know what to call it. I don't know how to describe it. There's something in the mind that conveys an idea, and I won't hear a voice as such. I won't hear words, actual literal words, but there is an idea. And it's even more interesting when there isn't a mental picture with it, or doesn't seem to be one, that it's all just sort of this idea in the mind. It's sort of like, it's almost as if there are um, some sort of feeling tone or some kind of event or experience in the brain that gets recognized as certain words or ideas. That's almost how it seems, because it doesn't, I don't actually have to hear chips. It's just, there's kind of this sense about it, this vague idea, and that's where I go.
Is there a chip-based sensation which is different from like a coffee sensation versus?
I don't, honestly, I don't think so. Um, it's really hard to describe. It's really hard to put into words, and it's not even a body thing. It's just there's sort of this vague idea in the mind, and it will be pointing towards something, get something to eat, or um, any number of possible activities or actions.
And prior to that, and this is where obviously, I know you said you've been kind of forgetting to do it until afterwards, but when you remember, noticing both those, but also like what were you just doing before that idea, vague as it might be, of chips popped up?
Hmm. Well, that's something I'll have to start paying attention to, because I really can't recall after the fact what kinds of things are going on beforehand. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Because that is most likely the most important thing. Like you're doing something, and I suspect you're either feeling, tired, bored, not enough, maybe undervalued, or like you need a boost of some sort, or um, yeah, it could be any number of things. But there's probably some sort of,
Oh.
you know, what's
There's this thing that happens sometimes where it seems like what is going on in the mind is this desire for a hit of pleasure.
mm-hmm.
You know,
Yep.
you know how it is, if you have something that you enjoy, talking about the experience of consuming something, eating or drinking, something happens in the mind and it kind of lights up. There's kind of this good feeling mental tone.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually, though, that comes about because there is idea of a deficit right now. There's
Mm,
we're using that as an antidote to get away from something that is here that I really don't want. So,
mm,
pleasure is great, but we tend not to have like draws for pleasure when we're just feeling neutral. It's usually when we feel like we're in some sort of a deficit or a negative state that we then, the mind starts, oh, well, you know what actually does feel good? A bag of chips.
mm.
Eating an entire bag of chips in one go, that's going to make you feel really good. And then that pops up as the possibility. Um, it's that there are these kind of really fast moving experiences that you're folding laundry one minute, and the next thing you know, you're in the kitchen in the pantry getting a bag of chips. But there are all
Mhm.
these different steps involved where whatever, it could be. The trick with this is sometimes you have really long, fairly long lasting sensations that are easy to identify, and sometimes these things move really quickly. But you could be folding laundry, get a passing feeling of um, just tiredness in your back, or
Mm.
uh, memory of something else that you have to do right after this. That's like, oh, right, after finish folding these, I have to go take the dogs for a walk or do something else, whatever it is. And in that, you get this like moment of like, oh, and then that is the brain's cue to be like, chips. They're gonna, you know what, you deserve a break. Go get yourself some chips, buddy. And then there's your diversion, but it can come through so fast that if we're not aware of it, it just seems like one seamless event. But there were most likely a series of precursors of sensations in the body, feeling tones, thoughts, all sorts of things jumbled one after another.
Well, so what needs to happen first is I need to start paying attention, and I can already kind of see this. The way it's going to work is, um, I'm doing some task, or well, maybe not even that. Maybe I'm doing nothing in particular, and there will be sort of this impulse, that voice, so to speak. And when that happens, I'm going to have to use that as a pointer that I need to reflect on what was going on in the body and in the mind just prior to that. Because
Yeah.
odds are I'm not going to catch it as it happens. I mean, I
Yeah.
think we can train ourselves to do that, but
Yep.
that's going to take a while. So at first, it's just going to be, you know, you know, the impulse to go get a cup of coffee. Okay, what was just going on? And
Exactly.
catch it right on the heels of it. Um, but the other thing too is not getting snared by that voice, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But
Say more about your experience of whatever that is, whether it
of
is a
voice,
voice or a, yeah.
I really don't know how to talk about it, and I think the reason is because I have a feeling there's more going on in those moments than I have been aware of. There probably is some kind of mental image. I'm guessing we'll find out.
Mhm.
Um, there may have been some thoughts, and that I wasn't catching. Um, where I'm picking it up is assuming that all those other things have happened. Um, where I first The first place in that series where I tend to become aware is right after something, some kind of something in the mind has this idea that um, a second cup of coffee for the day or a third cup of coffee
Mhm.
for the day would be a good idea. And I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, sadly, I've got little information at this point. I'm going to have to
Okay.
really make it a point to start paying attention.
Yeah, it's gonna
Kind of
help.
becoming, huh?
It's gonna help because the like if you don't have a mental image of it and you don't have a self-talk about it, I'm not sure how you would know that you're craving chips and not an apple or you know, to go kick a soccer ball. Like, it could literally be an infinite number of ideas that might show up. And so, ha- if you're not seeing a representation or hearing a representation of a particular food or something, how is it that you actually identify that thing?
Well, and that kind of ties into let me start over. Um, I understand what you're saying, and if I was going to make a bet, I would bet that you are correct because you almost always are, if not always, when it comes to these things, just because of the experience of years you've had with it.
Mm.
Um, but I have wondered many times if there is not some sort of mental talk that goes on in the mind without actually appearing as spoken language. Because sometimes it seems like there is.
It's
Or maybe
possible.
I'm misunderstanding what's actually happening.
It's hard to say because we all do have different internal worlds like that. Some people have absolutely no um, sense of internal visual field. So we say they have aphantasia, but that whole thing is a spectrum. So you have people
Right.
from aphantasia to hyperphantasia who, I mean, they see things that are in their mind and they show up like three-dimensionally in the real world, real world. So like there is a spectrum of that. And the same with the auditory field. You either people who have absolutely no internal narrative or internal voice, and people who, I think you could almost put like schizophrenia or something on the other end of that, where it's like, you can't just you hear voices so um prevalently, but you can't identify them as being you. They sound like they're being outside in the real world, around you. And I'm not sure if that's exactly a fair endpoint to that spectrum, but it's that sort of a thing where you have either no internal voice or extreme levels of internal voice, and it's a spectrum. And then for people who have neither of those, it's so fascinating. And this is one thing because I'm not one of them. I don't know what it's like. There is like some other kind of thinking awareness about things that people have who don't have internal visual or auditory states. Um, I can't even conceptualize what it is, because it's
Hmm.
something, but it works for them in a way that is neither visual nor auditory. And so I don't know if, we also have some of whatever that is, that it's kind of this knowing without seeing or hearing. Um, and we might have just different variations of that too. So it's possible for you that you have some aspect of thought which is not completely showing up in one of those easily definable categories. Or it could also be that you are just missing something in the visual field or the auditory field because they move so fast or just go under the radar. It could be a combination, and I have no unfortunate access to that. So
Well, I lean towards the second idea because of the fact that I do have mental talk and I do have mental images.
yeah,
You know, I'm keenly aware of that. I've experienced it many times. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So I think this is just a matter of now that we've discussed it, I need to make it a point to start looking for these things and looking for, if there's the drive to go get a cup of coffee, then okay, what was just going on?
yeah,
Until eventually it gets trained enough that when the mental pictures and the mental talk come up, that's enough by itself to get you to pay attention.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, and doing, what we talked about earlier with being really aware of like what you had tried where you're like, I'm gonna do this task without thinking, while I
mhm,
do it and just be there. That is going to put you in a better position also to notice if things come up. Because if you're like actively engaged in a task, I'm going to fold this laundry and I'm not going to think about anything. And you're just really engaged with folding. If you start to get any things of sensations in the body or images of chips on the counter or something else, you're going to be much more aware because you're focused in on a task, and that is something which is you haven't been following one thought story to another thought story to another thought story or something like that. you're
right.
you're you're aware of like what it feels like in your hands and your body as you're folding clothes. You can feel if something changes in that, and all of a sudden you start to feel achy or depressed or bored or guilty or whatever else happens to flash through the system. You're more aware if there are any types of thoughts or self-talk that pop up because you're on the alert for that. You're trying to maintain focus on the visual field and the tactile sense of actually folding the clothes and whatever you're doing. The more you're doing that, the more it's going to be easy to notice if these outliers pop up that are trying to get you to go do something else and divert.
Well, and this goes back to something that there was a period of time where I was getting this idea was being presented to me from various sources over and over and over for several months. And many of them were either unrelated or at least not directly related in terms of, like say, I heard it from different people and they didn't know each other.
Mm.
Uh, but there was a point in time right around the time I first started to, I'd heard about the Feder work and I started. Um, at that point in time, the only resource was what Pernilla had on YouTube.
Yeah.
And around that point in time, oh, and there was the Feder meeting at POK. I'd forgotten about that.
All right. Yeah.
And but I was hearing from, like I said, it was coming from all sorts of places that learn to be in the body.
Yeah.
Learn to be in the body. I kept getting that over and over and over, trying to be in the
Yeah.
body as much as you can. And that's what this brings to mind is, boy, there really is, probably could come up with a long list of really strong reasons why trying to train yourself to do that is so beneficial and really important to
Yeah.
this kind of work.
Yeah. I absolutely believe that. Um, for one thing, there are just so many signals and cues and changing states that we're completely oblivious of when we're lost in the mind. But also being in the body, being like we talked about, the default mode network, right, is the thing that's creating the stories about our existence. It's the daydreaming part of the brain. The more we are caught in those stories and the daydreaming, the more we are up in the mind, the less we're aware of the body. The more we're
Mm.
aware of the body, the more that bodily awareness becomes a task, right? Staying with bodily awareness is just like
Yeah.
staying with the breath. So it puts living, it literally, it's mindful living, right? You are being mindful as you are doing tasks because you are feeling the body, and that task positive network is turned on because your task is actually feeling what's in the body. So you are less likely to have and be caught in thoughts because you are actually here present with much more of what's going on around you. Also, we have a much richer experience of the world when we're engaged with our actual senses. And the body is contributing a lot of, at least a fifth, if not more than a fifth of those senses that we have available, right? The sensory information that's coming in. We have a lot of visual stimulation. We have a lot of auditory stimulation. We don't have quite as much of the olfactory and the gustatory, unless we're like eating or something. They're kind of there, but the body is a pretty sizable organ that has, you have the interoception, you have all of the sensation of the environment pushing against the skin. You have all of the states of the emotional senses and how they're interacting with the body and the hormones and all of that stuff. All of that is showing up as a really large amount of information that we are completely unaware of when we're just lost in thought.
I think one of the last things you were saying was talking about how it makes for a richer experience when we're aware of all of our senses, was
Yeah.
approximately what you said.
Yeah, and especially because we miss out on all of this emotional data and sensory data that's going on down here if we're only lost up in the mind. Um, in practices like, like I'm always giving people the see, hear, feel meditation and stuff like that, all that's really about tuning in with the senses and coming into direct experience is all about becoming in tune with the senses in a way where you are almost exclusively noticing one or more sense fields at a time. And that attention alone just makes everything feel a bit more alive and vivid and bright and loud and close and uh wonderful. Like it's generally pleasurable to be in direct connection with the senses like that, as opposed to just being in that kind of half muted dull world that we live in where we're at least partially, if mostly, locked somewhere in our thoughts that are disconnecting us from the world.
Right. Well, it's interesting that when you consider everything that is to be gained from doing that, that when it comes to training the mind to do that, you'd think it would just, oh, okay, this works this way, and these are the results and the benefits and blah
Uh,
blah blah, and it would just go to it like a magnet. But
yeah, I
instead,
know.
it doesn't. It's the opposite. It just you have to
Yeah.
keep over and over it endlessly, constantly. No, let's please come back here. Come back here.
Yeah.
Oh, the resistance. I mean,
Oh,
you have the whole world to gain, so to speak.
I know. I know. I think a lot of it is because our thoughts tend to be preventative in a way. We tend to be lost in thought a lot about what's coming up, what we're going to be doing, how to do it best, how to avoid danger. And I think there's that kind of evolutionary safety drive where if I'm just completely living in the present moment, I don't know I'm going to be eaten by a tiger until I'm physically being gnawed on, my legs being gnawed on by the tiger. If you have like that constant, you're projecting what you think is out there, you're constantly expecting maybe the worst or some of the more dangerous and threatening possible aspects. You're there's like an evolutionary benefit to constantly being in thought to at least a certain extent where we're checking in, checking in, checking in, checking in. um I'm not sure that, long-term longevity for the species, it's necessarily a great thing to be completely present with no thought, no distractions. We also tend to be less engaged with, uh, you know, needing to fulfill desires and things when we're just totally present with what is. Um, I think the what we see is that the whole selfing mechanism has kind of helped us to evolve as a species. It's
Hmm.
also given us all sorts of neuroses and suffering and created a world where we're constantly at war with each other because we also believe our thoughts and
Mm-hmm.
so many detriments. But it hasn't been, I think the reason that we have it is because it was a strong enough adaptation that it has helped us to create a sort of a niche for ourselves that we can survive in.
Well,
But you know,
I'm sorry, I thought you were pausing.
no, I'm paused. Go ahead.
I don't disagree with all you're saying, but at the same time, I know that when I've had those experiences of being just completely plugged into the moment and right here, and thought is either just significantly, profoundly reduced, or in some cases, it's just not happening for a period of time. That go back all the way to the very first one-on-one, and when I was describing how I wound up, eh, you know, um, how I wound up following this path. I'd mentioned that this experience I'd had in the playground one evening with
Yeah,
I was taking Tuesday to the playground, and I think back on that night and some of the other times that those experiences have shown up, and I could see something right as it's beginning to form, like, oh, that's going to turn into an issue.
yeah,
I could
yeah,
see something which I normally would have missed it. I wouldn't have caught it until it had started to become much more pronounced, and at the level of, oh, well, there's a danger or there's a
yeah,
problem.
yeah,
Instead, I was seeing it right at its absolute genesis, and could see where it was headed, and make, without even using any language, just kind of this quiet intelligence,
yeah,
adjust things appropriately with regard to whatever is making its way into reality.
yeah,
So I just, I mean, I'm not
yeah, yeah,
advocating for that as that's what we should be striving for. I just think it's interesting that, because the desire, some of the things you said are absolutely true. Desire is muted. That moment
yeah,
is so satisfying, you don't want for anything else.
yeah,
Um, but at the same time, it seemed like there was this advantage because you could see things right at the absolute point of their coming into the world, you
yeah,
know? And so I
yeah.
just wonder,
The,
that's all it
yeah,
is.
yeah. No, it makes sense. I think there's a balance between having that, like, there's still, like, in what you're describing, there's still a state of awareness of possibility of the future. There's still some thought there, but you're not lost in the
Yeah,
thought
you're right.
in the way that we normally are. Where we get it, it sounds like a sweet spot of being present, but also aware of how these things might unfold. So there's still
Yeah.
some capacity to think and to ha to um, project the some near future possibility. Our problem is that we tend to be lost in just constant habitual thought, which is, usually unproductive in that case. The thought is a great tool when disciplined and, restrained. Um,
Hmm.
it is also just a complete nightmare for people when they get completely identified with it and it just has free reign to just take over. So happy medium is a good thing. We really want to
Yeah.
find that middle way.
And I had overlooked the aspects that you just described. You're right about that. I hadn't, that had gone completely, um, th- that had escaped my attention. So,
Yeah.
but that reminds me of something else. I was listening to one of Pernilla's videos the other day, one of the earlier ones. It's like it's in the first three or four fetters. and she was saying something about how we identify with thought, and I can't tell you exactly which video it is. I have to go to my YouTube history, um, and I can't tell you exactly how she said it, but the way it struck me listening to it was that she was saying that if you've dissolved the first fetter, then you are completely free from identifying with thought.
Mm,
And I don't doubt my experience of seeing the illusion of the first fetter. Um, for a variety of reasons, I don't doubt it. Yet at the same time, okay, I know thought's not true, and there are times when I don't buy into it, and there are times I can see, oh, that's just a thought, and completely set it aside, and it doesn't become an issue or a problem or stir up emotions or cause a reaction. It just comes and goes. But there are other times where thought can snare me,
mm,
and so a little puzzled by that, because if I understood it correctly,
mm.
and dissolving the first fetter means you're not identifying with thought at all, then it strikes me as kind of odd that sometimes it seems, I'm going to say seems because I could be misunderstanding what's happening, but it seems like there is some identification with thought, or taking it, at least taking it as true.
Yeah. Which is one of the reasons why we usually say it's always useful to keep coming back to the first fetter stuff because
Mhm.
as clear as we can be, there are still aspects that tend to keep coming back. And so exactly when you have that snag, you get snagged by a thought, that's a moment of identification with thought. If there was like absolute, complete pure, there is never any connection to any thought
Keep
whatsoever.
talking.
Yep, yep.
You know what you're saying.
I was right. I'll wait.
Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. It's always with these dogs.
I- if you had absolutely never, any connection or any association or any identification or attachment with any of those thoughts, then yeah, great. But as long as we do, then it's just something to look into. Okay, where was the stickiness or the attachment to that particular thought? In what way was there an investment with it? In what way were you not on that level above where you were just kind of witnessing it?
Well, I've been taking the wrong tack with it then, because frequently when that happens, and it's funny because I have this habit is somehow, it wasn't something that was done intentionally, but this habit's fairly well trained in that in those sorts of instances, I will respond with inquiry, although I'm looking in the wrong direction, because what I typically do is, there in identifying with a thought, there's a sense of someoneness.
Hmm.
And so the inquiry that comes up is, okay, what exactly here is creating the sense of someone being here? So, but
Also,
instead of doing,
also valid.
okay, well, I mean, so
Totally.
that I could go either way. I could either do what you were suggesting, or I can look for what's creating a sense of self.
Yeah, yeah, also
Okay.
valid. But it's interesting, especially when we're talking about like the looking for the sense of self is useful in a lot of different ways because a lot of times we feel bodily identification, it's useful for that. A lot of times we just feel this kind of like unspecified sense of identification of course, I'm here, and that is really useful. If you find that a lot of times you're not identified with those things, and a lot of times you're not even identified with thoughts, but then certain thoughts, for some reason, you get stuck to them. They get
Mhm.
attached. Well, then those are really useful to look into. Well, what is it about that thought that felt sticky? And then what happened in that experience? Like if I was feeling completely not identified to begin with, and then all of a sudden a thought about, I don't know, having to pay a certain bill or something comes up, and all of a sudden you feel locked in to that thought. What has just shifted? Did a self just suddenly come online in conjunction with that thought about my finances? Was there
Hmm.
suddenly a new contraction in the body? Was there some mental image? Was there some self-talk? Was there whatever? You just want to be clear for you. What has just happened that has suddenly gone from unidentification, la la la, to, oh, that's important. I've got to do something about that. And this feeling of like, you know, dire self-reliance. Um, and that's where to look for that.
Yeah, and what that frequently turns out to be, although there are variations on this, and occasionally sometimes something a bit different, um, but more often than not, what I find is just that sort of energy of the human body
Mm,
metabolizing, operating,
no,
that coupled with and the mental picture, like I said earlier, it's there and gone. I mean,
yeah,
milliseconds. And
yeah,
so, but all that's all it needs. That creates some idea in the mind that there's someone here. And then there might be a little shot of adrenaline or a feeling of worry or a feeling of even satisfaction. I mean, it doesn't have to be a negative feeling.
yeah.
And I find these things pretty consistently again and again and again. And what that has led to was um, just in the last week or so, in doing that in one particular instance, I wondered, is it enough to just keep doing this? Is the repeated looking in and of itself sufficient? And that's that. I mean, is it?
Well, it's again, everything is dependent on the person and the timing. P- Possibly.
Okay.
It's I still think relevant to look into why those particular thoughts are snagging. But the thing is, when you notice you have that, what you've just described, having that instance of a shot of adrenaline, idea in the mind, all of that stuff that goes on, what has you can identify all of those individual components. So
Hmm.
where does the self come into that? You have an experience, you have a thought, it's followed by adrenaline, by an image in the mind, by another sensation in the body, by a voice in the head. Where is the self located in any of those appearances?
It's not. It's assumed.
So how is that assumption being recognized?
Oh, good God! Wow. Huh. Okay, well, there's another thing to look for then, because
Yes.
I can't answer that question at this moment.
Yes.
How is that assumption recognized?
Yeah.
Huh. Now, let me ask you this,
Yeah.
because now I start to think to ask that to myself, and immediately immediately it seems unclear. So, what does that look like when it comes to how is that assumption being recognized?
Well, again, right, we only have five senses. And
Hmm.
like I say, we have the five external and the five what we call internal senses,
Right.
so it's gonna be showing up in some of those in some way. It's gonna be different for everybody. And so I
Okay.
can't tell you exactly what it's gonna look like for you or
Sure.
sound like or feel like, but it's to find out because I would say it's of the same kind of nature as that caricature that we talked about.
Oh, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. It's the
That
same kind of nature of that caricature.
that caricature that you have of you as a somehow younger adult than, a 30-year-old who is 2 inches shorter than you. That same caricature that is online that gives you a sense of Darrell, the kind of immature young one, that
Huh.
that is a similar experience to recognizing, well, I had a thought about my finances and suddenly I felt like the self came on, but you're breaking it down into its components.
Hmm.
So when when those components are seen for what they are, how how else could that caricatured idea show itself? How can you be experiencing this self that is, how do I explain this?
Hmm.
Okay, that's a it's too complicated of a metaphor. Um, have you seen those so specific? Have you seen those art pieces where people take like random garbage and they put it together in a way that if you're looking at it from one specific direction, it looks like a bird or a human or something else. And then as you get closer to it, you find out it's just like old action figures and toothbrushes and, just bits and pieces of trash that they picked up someplace. But seen from the right angle, the mind takes all of these different components and makes it into what looks like a living object. As soon as you see it closer, you start to see the individual components for themselves, and that impression of it being a bird or a person just dissolves. Like it doesn't stand up because you realize, oh, I'm just looking at garbage. It's the same basic effect that when you notice the the adrenaline spike and the sensation in the chest and the feeling of metabolism and the all the stuff going on in the mind, and you see each one of those as an individually occurring thing that when put together creates this impression of
Mhm.
the unified self.
Right.
When you see those individual parts, where is that where can that impression of the self retreat to? Where does it go? Does it just completely vanish the same way that the belief in that being a bird disappears when I find out that it's just made of old plastic? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like,
I'm understanding you
yeah,
completely.
go ahead.
I'm thinking back on the times when I've inquired into this, and I don't have any difficulty seeing how breaking everything down into component parts, that at that point, if I ask, how did we phrase that question? How is that assumption being recognized? I don't know. I mean, I hit a brick wall.
Okay, so observe it, right? See if you can find anything. If you can't find anything,
Hmm.
then there shouldn't be a problem because it's non-existent. Right? There has to be some impression of the self that is giving you the feeling of being a self. If that's not online, then it's just not in existence for that moment, and all
Okay.
is well with the world. If it is there, though, it should be discoverable.
Okay. So what I need to look for, and I haven't been thinking to do, is when, after having separated out the component parts, notice whether or not a sense of self is still present.
Yeah, exactly. And if so, it's got to be found in one of those same sense fields.
Now, is it possible that the mind can just make an assumption? I mean, without getting into a lot of self-talk that
Mhm.
um, kind of like if you're out walking and you see a tree, you can recognize that, and there's sort of this sense of that's a tree, and it doesn't even have to be said out loud in the
Yeah,
mind.
yeah,
So
yeah.
is it if that's where that assumption is being recognized, is that an adequate answer, or do we still need to look further?
I think you still need to go into the direct experience of it, like the how it's recognized for you, because
Hmm.
knowing that a tree is a tree, even without saying it, again, useful, but also an overlay that we have. It's something
Right.
where it's that initial impression that comes online as soon as we see the tree. Now, if we broke up, the thing is that in your experience of the self, what are you even seeing that gives you the impression of a Darrell? Is it when we see a tree, you have to see like a physical shape that
Hmm.
gives you the of a tree. What are you
Right.
actually seeing in your experience that gives you that same impression of Darrell?
Huh. So there's something being overlooked, and
Yeah,
it's, here's the thing is it's I don't have a problem with doing it. I really don't. In fact,
yeah, yeah,
I'm really glad to do it and to be able to.
yeah,
But it makes me think of that moment when the first fetter, just kind of
yeah,
went up in smoke, in that it was understood that there was this belief that there was someone seeing, in particular, that there was somebody who was moving the eyes, and there was
yeah,
somebody who was taking in what was being seen.
yeah.
And there was something else to that that I cannot remember now offhand. I think I wrote it down, but anyway, it's not here now. And I remember being so astonished that it was hidden in plain sight, that there was this belief and this sense of someone seeing and moving the eyes, and there being someone in that, because it was hidden in plain sight. I mean, it was right there the whole time, and
Yeah.
I'd been looking for months.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing here, is that it can be really hard to track this down, because it's not like geocaching or something like that, where you can go, okay, well, where am I going to start?
Yeah.
What is it going to look like when I find it? You don't know, so you're completely in the dark, and you just have to keep going at it and going at it, going at it until it reveals itself.
Yeah, but it should be fairly surface level. It shouldn't
Okay.
be really deep because it is something that you've been interacting with every day of your life that has
Mm.
made you assume that, that Daryl is accurate. It's something that maybe has been so prevalent that it's been overlooked, but there's something in your experience which is giving you that impression over and over
Now,
again in certain situations.
so sometimes there's this idea that that sense of body is it. That, oh,
Mm,
okay, well, that's where that sense of self is coming from in this. And I would think that if that was really the answer, that there would be more, I don't know, that there would be some kind of internal, um, that it would jive. There would be some kind of
mm,
sense of, yeah, that's it. And I can see that. And like, yeah, well, that creates a sense of someone being here. But there's not, how when you answer something and it feels right, there's not that
yeah,
sense of it feeling right.
yeah.
And that leads to the idea that no, you still haven't located it.
Think of it like this. It's not necessarily that you have to find the thing and find that it's the right answer. It's
Mhm.
more that you're seeing that caricaturization or that impression of something that you thought existed.
Mhm.
A, how do I put that? That it is there, right? It's not real, but that there is an impression. Just like you said, there was a belief that there was somebody who was moving their eyes and taking in information. You recognize that that wasn't a true statement about reality, but that
Mhm.
there was a belief that there was there. This is something similar. There's something that is felt or seen or heard or experienced in some way that says that this all of these components are adding up to a sense of Darrell. And particularly maybe a sense of Darrell who is bad, insufficient, inadequate, immature, whatever the thing, whatever the narration is that is associated with it,
Mhm.
just recognizing that that thought has to be known in some respect. It has to be, uh, just like I said, you wouldn't know that you were craving chips unless you had some sort of an impression of chips, that you have to know where you're going.
Okay.
Similar sort of idea here. You wouldn't know that there is a bad Darrell, if you can't conceptualize a bad Darrell, how is that bad Darrell being conceptualized? And when you notice all of these little, oh, adrenaline and all of those little things that are going on, if it still feels like there is a self present in that, where is the conceptualization happening? Where is that caricature? Where is that overlay? Where is that whatever it is that seems to be binding those things together into something real that isn't?
Mm.
It really comes down to your personal version of how this is being constructed, which is why I can't just tell you, where it is.
Sure.
Um, but it's that awareness of routinely breaking things down into their constituent parts
Hmm.
and then seeing what's left. Maybe it's best to say that.
Mm.
When they're broken down, what else is here? Is there any lingering feeling of self left when those parts have been seen as they are? And if so, it just drops the inquiry one level deeper. Then it's just like, okay, so what is still aware that all of these parts are here, but it still feels like the central point. It still feels like it's the awareness of those things. It still feels like the knower or the if it has more of that personal flair to it. But where is Darrell still in the middle of this? What still feels, bad or insufficient about this, even with all of these components being on display?
Mm. So it goes back to what we were saying earlier about how, I mean, I don't think we said it in these words, but the idea was expressed that um, there is a need to make sure that we're looking more closely, kind of like with the impulse to go get a cup of coffee. I there are probably mental images, some sort of mental talk, something going on that is being overlooked. And it sounds like it's the same thing here, that
Yeah.
there's something being overlooked and I need to look more closely. Now, I'm assuming that finding the answer doesn't mean that there's an aha moment or anything like that. It can be very, I'm assuming it can be a quiet non-event of,
Yeah, yeah.
no, there's nothing here. Okay. And then that goes back to what I asked earlier. Is it is it enough to just keep inquiring? And then if we keep inquiring, that some other part of the brain goes, oh yeah, yeah. And then that illusion of self is uh there's whatever else might be in there is undone.
Yeah.
If that does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, completely, completely. I've seen different proposals for how the whole awakening process works, in the brain, and there are some similar but also conflicting ideas. Um, One of the things, though, is that especially for those of us who are on the kind of slow path, like you have sometimes people have that just instantaneous flash that for whatever reason happens, and I've seen, suggestions of how that might happen, but for the slow path, it really is that training of the certain networks to basically stop creating and or believing in that sense of the self that's showing up. And it really is that repetitive, okay, you do it, you notice it, you're diverting attention away from that selfing mechanism that is creating all the thoughts and the narrations and this narrative and all that stuff. That's being turned off regularly, and you are flipped more into this kind of open, spacious awareness that takes the place of the default mode network's narrative self. And the more you do it, the more it becomes the norm. The
Mhm.
less you get attached into the beliefs of these other, they just get less sticky, I think, because um, they're engaged with differently with different networks. And so as these things are unfolding, it just kind of becomes the slow path is just this natural changing of brain states, which means that there's no. you know, it's not necessarily a one-time aha that is going to do the big change. It's really
Right.
repetitively looking, oh, okay, I see that this is just components. Oh, I see that there is no extra layer of self that's actually here. And each time you do that, you're also reinforcing that you're doing the watching, you're paying attention to a task, you are in the moment, you're in the present. So all the while that we do self-inquiry, we are reinforcing that ability to stay present in the moment and not get lost in discursive narrative daydreaming thoughts.
Right.
So I think it's all really working together in these interesting ways. Um, and yeah, the key is really keep don't get don't get lax about the I've seen it and then that's it. It's more like keep seeing it, keep recognizing every time you get a hint of there's some sort of self, some sort of identification, something that has come online. You feel
Uh-huh.
the components, you see the images, you do that and let it dissolve. And each time you
Yeah.
do that, you are changing the neural pathways. You are actively enlightening the system, so to speak, by doing that.
You're
You're
turning the
making
lights
it
on one at a time.
you are, yeah, and you're making it more likely that those lights are going to stay on going forward.
Well, I think it's there's some degree of importance to explaining how this even came about because, like you said, consistently going back to revisit other fetters, and I was listening to Pernilla's videos on fetters 4 and 5,
Nice.
and at some point in time, she had said something about, and I wish I could remember what, but she was saying if you're finding that this is not the case with fetters 4 and 5, you need to go back and visit the earlier fetters because there's something that's been left undone there.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have any doubt, again, about that moment of seeing through the illusion of self because
Yeah.
too many things have happened since
Hmm.
that time, too many peculiar little changes and other things that sometimes are even hard to talk about that, I mean, it's clearly a before and after.
Yeah.
Um, but it's sort of like the committee in the mind. Not everyone has gotten the message you know
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so because of her saying that in that video, I went ahead and went back and kind of revisited some of the videos for the first three fetters, and there may or may not be some stuff in fetter 3. Fetter 2 it feels like it's pretty well locked down.
Yeah.
So that directed me back to the first fetter, and I was automatically doing these inquiries anyway, so it just made
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is this for whatever reason, this habit is somewhat well established. It
Yeah.
happens with a certain degree of consistency. So let's go ahead and see what questions are here, see what information is here. And so that's why this is even coming up at all today anyway,
Love that.
is
Yeah.
because I was led, just by this thing, whatever it is we're in, being what it is,
Yeah.
led from 4 and 5 back to Fetter 1.
Yeah. Love that.
So,
It's something that we have to do. When we talk about like breaking fetters and that sort of thing, the problem is that we often have kind of an idea of the mind as being like almost like a clockwork mechanism where you have like certain, you know, uh, like the way I vision it would be like, you have this one whole system of gears that's working, and then you break the first fetter, and like that one stops working. It like shifts the mechanism over to these other gears, and now you're on and it just doesn't work like that. We have this very complicated wetware up there that is so messy and integrated and convoluted and yeah, we have certain insights and we have changes in brain structure and we develop in different ways and none of it is consistent and predictable and logical or any of that. So we can have so many insights in different fetters and still have spots where some of them are still relevant, you know? So we just work with the ones that are relevant. We work with the ones that are still sticky. And
Yeah.
then when another one, isn't a problem, it's not a problem. When another one suddenly shows up and you're getting really identified with it, then we work with it. There's no, the problem with that idea of seeing through the fetter and getting that is that it makes everything sound very rigid, and it makes it sound very ironically selfie. That, like, I have done the thing, I have seen it, I am fundamentally changed in this way and can never go back. Well, what the hell are we talking about? What is it that has fundamentally changed and can never go back? If you have this constantly flowing system of changing elements, you have a mind that is constantly interacting with the environment, with other people, with all sorts of information coming in and out, with new experiences outside and inside the body. And all of this is updating and projecting and changing and changing and changing. How could we possibly have one specific state that has now shifted eternally in this other direction and can't go back? It is
Hmm.
way too fluid of a system to have something like that.
Yeah. I would think it would be good to refer to it as hyperdynamic.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that I think it's much better to think of this as a very dynamic state that is always in flux.
Yeah.
And we just, we see where we are in any given moment, where the identification is, where the feeling of a self is, where the feeling of craving or desire is. If they're not here, they're not here. We can't work with the feeling of craving if you don't actually have a craving, but it's a great time when you do. I mean, we can use the imagination and we can, do those kinds of inquiries with it, but generally speaking, even then, we're still creating a sense of a craving for us to work with. We can only work with things when they are present in our experience. So we can induce a sense of craving or aversion by using the mind to create a sort of virtual state that we work in for the sake of inquiry, but you're still then feeling that thing so you can work with it. You can't work with investigating the sense of self if the sense of self is not there at the moment. We have to have something in our experience. You can't uh, dissect a tomato without a tomato being in front of you, right? Like you can't analyze things without them actually being there. So we just work with what's here while it's here and make the most of it. And then when it's gone until it might come back again. Right?
Well, the thing is that based on my limited experience, it seems like it needs to be understood that sometimes these things can um, hide themselves in sneaky ways.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't mean that it's not um, just patently obvious once it's seen, but until that moment, it may be it may not be something that's just right out in the open where it's
No.
easily seen.
No, no, and I think a lot of times it's actually just because we take it so for granted, we grow accustomed to it, and we don't think to question the things that are very obvious in our experience, or we don't notice them anymore because they're there so often.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The blind spots.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
So
Wow.
it, it's an endless path of enjoyment. Just fun all around.
Well, that's the thing is I try to remember to be grateful for the fact that this is even where my life wound up.
Yeah.
I really do. I try to remember to be grateful for that. I try to remind myself that I can enjoy this work and this process. Um, and there was something else in there. I lost it. But
Uh,
anyway, it's
Yeah.
um, it's something that, in spite of the challenges and whatever else comes along with it, ultimately it is. I don't feel like it should be viewed as work or a struggle or something that's hard or any of that because sometimes I hear things and see things that lead me to it seems like that's what people sometimes turn it into,
Mm,
and that's not the case at all. I mean, because
yeah.
first of all, there's no one doing it. I mean, this whole thing is, it's
Yeah.
so easy to see how this whole thing is the result of just, everything.
Yeah,
Everything's the cause of everything else. And
absolutely.
and it just, things took a particular direction, and um, wound up here. It wasn't because of any personal doing.
Yeah.
Uh, um, but see if I can hold on to the point I was heading towards. Um, Even then, it still requires diligence and intention, and diligence and intention. Um, uh, Letting that turn into exertion or anything of that sort really unfairly colors the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
And
Yeah.
while having said that, having going back to the first fetter, I never once ever saw that as um, regression or
Yeah.
failing
Excellent.
or somehow somehow undesirable or anything of that nature. I mean, it's really it's nothing more than, well, great. I'm glad that my attention was directed this way, and that things have developed in such a way that there's a recognition of an ability to go back and investigate, um,
Yeah.
a territory that I had previously been working in.
Yeah, I love that. And I wish more people would have that attitude because there is so much comparison and spiritual ego that comes in that I've
Mhm.
been there. I can't go back there because exactly like you said, just people feel like a failure, like they're regressing, like they've lost something, and it's just absurd. It is reinforcing the very thing that they have supposedly seen through. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's it is amazing how adaptable the sense of self is in sort of shape shifting and blending itself into, new identities that get the spiritual stamp of approval. You know, oh, that one's okay. That's the enlightened self. It's fine. That self is seen through itself. It's great. It's all right.
The self is seen through itself. Good
So,
luck getting out of that loop.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So, yeah, I think we all need to have that level of humility when we're doing this stuff and just be with what's here. Just let it unfold. Um,
Well, the thing is if we don't, then we shoot ourselves in the foot.
completely.
I mean, to take a negative um, view of having to or needing to revisit earlier fetters or continue a particular inquiry or whatever it might be,
Yeah,
it just colors the whole thing with this negative, heavy kind of um, uh, sense of it. And then, in my experience, what that does is the brain goes, "Ew," and it doesn't want to go
yeah,
there.
yeah, of
You
course,
know,
of course.
so the last thing you want to do is start shutting yourself off from the ability to be able to access every part, if there is such a thing, every part of the process.
Yeah,
Um, so that you can make sure that you're really um, seeing what needs to be seen.
yeah, yeah. I absolutely agree. Um, yeah, yeah. It's baffling how hard we make everything for ourselves. Like it's just that idea of just surrendering or letting go and just allowing things to be without coloring them, without making them into some other chore, without putting a whole other level of stuff on them and interacting with it
Mm.
through all of those other layers of assumptions and judgments about it, it takes so much more effort and it's so much more work and it causes so much more suffering in our lives. And yet, that is our default way of being. It is really absurd.
Yeah, and it seems to be a very Western, I wouldn't say exclusively, but a
Yeah.
very Western sort of attitude and approach. But there's one other thing I wanted to ask you before I forget
Yeah.
is that, um, in going back to the first three fetters, um, I'm trying to think of how to ask this simply. Okay, so I've noticed certain things that have been uh, there have been emotional reactions and resistances to certain things like Tuesday's boyfriend coming over or something like that. And whereas normally this isn't a problem, or, feeling kind of, maybe feeling bitter towards him, and there's some other things, and I can't think of what they are right now, but the point is this, is that um, I feel like, like that thing I mentioned earlier about seeing how I feel like everyone else is good. They're,
Mm,
they are perfectly good, sufficient people unto themselves, and I'm not. And that and a few other things that have revealed themselves have they seem to kind of have completed the picture. And I feel like there's really not a lot left to be said about that part of Fetter too. But what does seem like is far from finished, or at least far from, I don't know what word to use,
mm,
uh, sufficiently worked on, is um, the need for the affirmations. And I
mm.
still do those,
Yeah,
uh,
amazing. Nice.
especially when something comes up. If something comes up and there's any of those programs running, that's
Yeah.
immediately what comes up. And so I keep doing that. And it seems like it seems like that's it. It seems like it's just a case of you don't need to go digging anymore. You don't need to try to find something else. You don't need to find some other hidden thing or some,
Yeah. Yeah.
previously unknown wound or hurt, or
Yeah. Yeah.
just keep doing the affirmations.
Yeah.
Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I think, if something comes up that's really obviously like, okay, I need to look into this particular thing, but then go for it. But I agree the kind of constant treasure hunting for bad unconscious material, probably not going to be all that helpful. The little things that I would suggest you to investigate, though, don't take anything for granted. So when you say like
Mm.
other people are good, I'm bad, what does good mean? What it
Huh.
what is your interpretation of what good is when you are giving that label to other people? And
Okay,
in
that's a
that,
great question.
in the specificity of that, you are supposed to be the opposite, right? You have already indicated they are good, Darrell is bad. So I saw that. So so what traits indicate that somebody is good? And is it true that you do not harbor any of those traits, or that you harbor the opposite of those traits?
Okay, so what traits indicate that someone is good or something is
Yeah.
good? And then how
Do,
did you say that about the opposite of that?
yeah, so do you actually harbor none of those traits? Because the idea would be, if they have good traits and I must not have any of them. Do you either have none of those traits, or do you have like the opposite of them? They have absolutely no greed at all, and I am completely racked with greed, utterly out of the gills. Um, and then do the opposite. Define what bad is.
Okay.
And then what traits do you supposedly have that make you bad that they don't have or have the opposite of?
Um,
And obviously the idea here isn't to, make yourself feel miserable and less
Right.
than, but it's to investigate because you've probably never consciously chosen or decided what actually it means to be a good person in that regard or a bad person in this regard.
Okay.
And then you're basically proving to yourself that it's bullshit. You're proving to yourself that whatever traits you come up with, that I'm assuming you will be able to find some of those good traits in you. You will be able to find some of those bad traits in them. You will be able to find that none of this has any, all of those ideas are completely empty, right? They're conditioned. They are based off of a biased sort of judgment call. It's not an inherent trait in somebody. It's not even there's like
Mm.
no trait that is necessarily inherently good or bad in all circumstances either. They're conditional,
Ah, I see. I see.
right? So we're breaking down the seeming reality of the traits, the seeming reality of the labels of those traits, the seeming reality of the label that you have attached to yourself as having, denoting that you have a certain number of traits which we're calling bad and too few of these traits which we're calling good, and they have more of them. We're analyzing all of that slightly intellectually, but it's mostly so that you really get that visceral feeling of, oh, this was just another belief that has gone completely uninvestigated. This was just another concept that I've never actually looked deeply enough into to break down the actual power that it has over the experience and the beliefs in that caricature of this and that caricature of that. It's what's creating that caricature.
That's a great idea. Well, that gives me something very specific and concrete to work on um, for the time being.
Amazing.
I
Yeah, it's
mean,
almost
there's
like,
plenty else to do, but I mean,
yeah,
that really, there's some real payoff in there.
yeah, I think so. I think so. It really comes down to that not taking any beliefs or thoughts for granted. As soon as you hear that, uh, I'm I'm really bad at at, yeah, I think my brain is shutting down. Examples. I'm really bad at examples today, and that was a just even losing the word example altogether is probably a good indication of that. Um, yeah, but it's like when you think of like a caricature that a sketch artist would do, they're finding certain traits that a person has and then greatly exaggerating them to make up to really sell it. And you can recognize like a person by that exaggeration. And you have these beliefs of good, bad, all of these other kind of inherent things, which have been caricatured in the same way. You have taken like a very rough idea of like, oh, big nose, oh, big ears. And then that has become sort of the way that you interact with that whole idea of adulthood, of being, like what is it that it means for those people to be a functioning adult that is like older or more adapted or adulty than you currently are? What is it about your traits and behaviors and all of that that you see as being like a kid? you know, Breaking all of that down where none of it has a place to stand because it's only a belief, it's only an idea or an abstract representation or a caricature.
Hmm.
So we want to break that down and find out all of those little parts that have been unfairly exaggerated or minimized to come to the actuality of this moving hyperdynamic system that has no traits. It has there is no permanent trait in this flowing, ever-changing system. There is no
Mhm.
trait in that ever flowing dynamic system that you look at and think as an adult who's got his shit together. There is no stability to that system. It's an ever changing system. And
Yeah,
it's,
it's
yeah, and it's all based on your projection of what you think that system looks like. Again, not to belabor the metaphor, but people go to a caricature artist, have a picture of them, and for a lot of them, they're like, this doesn't look anything like me because they don't see themselves the same way that person saw.
right,
That adult that you're talking to doesn't see themselves the same way that you see them. So you are caricaturing them in a way that is relevant only to the way that you are seeing them based on all of your presumptions and feelings of inadequacy in yourself and all of that, which is then being compared and compared with the way that you are projecting them and seeing them, and it sets up this whole bubble of reality thing where you're only interacting with yourself ever. But it's because you are cherry picking certain elements of what you see in them and then reflecting, I wish I had more of that, I wish I had less of that, I don't have that, I do have that, I must be this way because I don't see this in me. I am lesser than because I prefer the traits that I see out there than in here. Whatever it is, all of these dynamics are going on. And we just want to become aware that none of them are based on anything real. It's just a projection and a very unique perception, which is not going to be universal. It
right.
doesn't it doesn't extend to everybody else who's looking at the two of you next to each other.
Now, um, now this is going to be stating the obvious, but just to make sure
That's
it's
okay.
clear,
Yeah.
caricature is just shorthand for our interpretation of something.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
but it's generally a really like wrong interpretation or an exaggerated interpretation. It like
Yeah,
we have those interpretations of everything, but there are some things that we use as like a shorthand reference where it really doesn't bear any resemblance to the thing or very little resemblance, but it's our way of like mental shorthanding that like if you were to draw like the closest thing to like a stick figure reproduction of a tree that you would identify as a tree, it's like a symbol of a tree, you could do that. It's not going to look anything like a tree, but you could pass it to a kid and they'd be like, oh, that's a tree. You could
right.
pass it to anybody, they would see that. This is like your symbolic representation of Darrell or good or bad or
That person.
adult or that person. Yeah, exactly. So it's that abstracted kind of representation that isn't
Okay.
really accurate to it, but it's relevant to you based on all of your conditioning and
Okay.
and where you are in this particular moment and what it means in that interaction. If you're talking to that person, there's a reason why you are putting yourself down and putting them up in that moment. There's some dynamic that is playing out here.
Well, and I don't doubt that you're correct. That's something I'll have to make it a point to look into and see what's there. But I can tell you right now, it hit me a minute ago that there's this belief in all of that, that they are, for whatever reason, they are more qualified as a human being than I am.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I want you to look into. What does it mean to be qualified as a human being? None of that gets taken for granted.
I'm I've understood that and have been able to practice that idea
Hmm.
here and there in certain ways. But now, between this conversation today and some of Pernilla's videos in the last couple of weeks, it's not done. It's not
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
This
yeah,
process of getting this taken more internally will continue on probably
yeah,
forever. But
yeah,
I can kind of feel it, when you get in that state where something is being taken in,
yeah,
and that's what it feels
yeah.
like, is this idea is getting ingrained more deeply.
Love it.
Understanding that you have to ask that question a lot,
Yeah,
or that you have to practice that statement, take nothing for granted.
yeah, completely. Love that. Love that. Love that. Thank you very much. All
Yeah, well, thank
right.
you. Um,
say hi to Susanna for us, and
okay.
well, see you soon.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.